Okay, so we are now going to be marking Stephen COMMS. We've already read it twice, and it's very important that we read the whole thing twice, well, at least once, but preferably twice before you actually mark it. I think possibly here we could actually have a look at Stephen's plan and see that Stephen has written down 1, 2, 3, 4 things. He's written computer, Excel, broadband, word processor. And we can actually see that in his essay he's gone into a lot more. Now that can happen, it often does. However, I would say that Stephen has actually lost marks for how his work flows from one bit to the next.
Structure,
and how he structured it, and we'll show you examples of that in a bit. But what you can see is that if he had maybe highlighted these things and came into where he wanted them to be and come up with a bit more and maybe had them linking in and what they're used for here, then perhaps that would help him out quite a lot.
Right, okay, so the first thing that we'd look at here, and to notice again, Sir mentioned about the structure, is the absence of an introduction, which, although it doesn't show much understanding, really helps to set up the context and show the context, which is really, really important in order to be able to get into the good or high mark range. Now, Stephen has not done that, and it shows, and Sir said the flow just doesn't really start at all, and that's going to continue throughout the essay. And an introduction really is a must, as it shows in all parts of the mark scheme, that you have used a form and style of writing which is appropriate.
Let me just zoom in.
So,
where are we looking? Okay. Yes, use the form and style of writing which is appropriate for whatever it is, the purpose.
yeah, and because it's a discussion, you've got to really have an introduction to get that. So you're already starting to limit outside of or as high as up to the good mark range. Okay. What would say now? Stephen started off by talking about software, and he's gone straight into using
Excel.
Windows with Excel, which again isn't technically great or great understanding of a key terminology there. Although you can use brand names, you're better off using generic names. So, for example, an operating system and having a spreadsheet package. Now, what does show is, Stephen, you do show a good understanding of how it would be used and the different features that you would use. You've then gone on to talking about word processors, and that's, we can see then again straight away you're using common names or generic names for packages rather than being brand related.
Yeah. What we can actually see in here as well, though, is that what you're saying is fine. However, I can straight away, when I was looking at this as well, so I said to Sir, already I'm not putting him in the top brand because he's made so many spelling mistakes. And that's something you need to be very careful of.
Yeah, I think it's the same word, it's spelled 3 times.
Creates quite a lot, you're spelling wrong. Okay, it's really important that you bear these things in mind. Calculate, formulas, you put things like that.
Okay. Especially the keywords are important. You've then gone on still in that first paragraph to start talking about email. So we've covered a lot of software packages.
Move it there. And then we can pull it up, and then it's zoomed in quite. So loan from the bank. An email can be used with the word processor to create and send weekly newsletters to clients or staff on certain updates, for example, events, or perhaps the opening you could have put there as well, but that's not really.
Again, that's true as well. I think you're talking about mail merge, and again, you're not showing that without that sort of key understanding, that specialist vocabulary used, it's not moving yourself into that top bracket yet. Although it is correct, it's just still lacking that final bit of knowledge that the top band requires.
Yeah, I mean, at this point from reading that, you would still be in the low mark range because you've only spoken about software at the moment. But then we'll see in a minute, the next paragraph now puts you into the mid-mark range.
Yep, so you've moved on to your second part, which is talking about hardware. So you've talked about the fact that speakers will be needed to improve the quality of the atmosphere in the gym, to have music playing to engage the members. that's really actually quite concise. That's actually a good paragraph to have in there, where you have described why speakers could be used. Again, this is where to move into the top bracket, a discussion. So you might want to mention the fact that actually, I might have headphones attached to all of the equipment so that members can listen to music that they're interested in, as opposed to speakers, and then discuss the benefits and limitations of either one if you're going to really move up into the top 20 mark bracket.
Yeah, exactly, because as Sir said, advantages, disadvantages, they're a good way of starting to discuss, and then showing the other side that you understand an alternative. That's a good way to discuss.
We've then moved on to
a communication method.
Yeah,
just
so an internet broadband.
Can I just move this down?
Be needed for the email. Okay, and this again, I just want to link back to the flow, because you've talked about email in the first paragraph, and so this next paragraph on internet would have been a great follow-on to that, and it would really set up the flow. But having stuck the speakers in first, it's jumping all over the place.
I mean, it also seems very stark the way that you start things. It's like speakers may be needed, internet may be needed, email could be needed. What you want to be doing is saying, okay, so a form of so you could say a form of communications, or a form of software, or another device that I could talk about here, or leading on from email. A good way of connecting and communicating would be using internet broadband. So you're using words for joining paragraphs together.
Yep. Again, you've talked about email, and again you're discussing the fact that it can be used for advertising. Then we've talked about using Dreamweaver, which requires some coding knowledge. However, as it is a location, the site would be used to create a quick and simple website. And again, we've talked about alternatives that could be used, and we've done that in the coursework, using content managers as opposed to WYSIWYG web design packages. Again, bringing in that discussion. Again, it's still jumping all over the place, and it's showing here, as Sir said, the lack of a plan as to really sort of decide which order you're going to talk about things in.
But sorry, let me just jump in there, because what Sir was saying was extremely valid, but just be careful that you don't just do a software review, because it's not asking you for that.
Yeah.
It has to be linked to the context of the question, which of course was discussing the hardware, communication technology and software you could purchase before you start to trade, and why a gym would need them.
Yeah. Then we've moved on to walkie-talkies, and I have to say this is, I think, where your essay actually is at its strongest. Walkie-talkies may be needed so that staff can communicate effectively within the gym. And you've talked about the fact, and this is where you're starting to bring in a discussion, that it's lower cost for the companies rather than the use of mobile phones. That's about the only way we get into a discussion in here. Also, it's a quick, no numbers are needed to be to dial. And that's sort of the best bit. You've then gone on to more hardware with monitors, and will be required for the use of the computer along with the keyboard, and again that shows good knowledge before moving into a conclusion. You've shown, Stephen, really good knowledge of lots of different pieces of software, but because you haven't gone into the depth and you haven't discussed alternatives apart from the walkie-talkies, you've limited yourself to the good mark range. What would have been better, again this would have helped if you'd done the plan, is that if you'd have talked about less but gone into more detail to talk about alternatives.
The examiners always say that it's effectively how well you talk about different things, not how many you talk about. Okay, so be careful with that, because I know at the GCSE you can quantify things a lot more. In the A-level it's all about your depth of knowledge. In some cases it is breadth of knowledge, but not normally on a 20 marker.
If you're going to do breadth, you've got to make it flow a lot better than this to be able to get any chance of getting into the good range, and also make sure that you talk about lots of alternatives, perhaps not describing what in such detail as the advantages and disadvantages of perhaps one or two alternatives. But you've covered all the points, so that means you've least in the good mark range. So I'll bring this in. So candidate shows understanding made reference to at least one. You've done that. Candidate describes at least two. You've done all three. So we're in this bit, and you're on the described. You've only discussed in one place.
And even then, it was quite a weak discussion.
Yeah, it was quite very brief. So then we're looking at how into this bracket you are. The candidate has, in the main, used a form of style of writing which is appropriate. Borderline there, but again, because we said about the sharpness, the sort of the non-flowing, the not use of introduction, but the conclusion was good, with occasional lapses. So yeah, I'd probably agree that you're in there with that. So putting you around about the 12 or 13 at the moment. Candidate is used well-linked sentences and paragraphs. Informational arguments are generally relevant and well structured. Well, all of your statements are relevant. Within each paragraph, they were well structured. It was the linking together that perhaps wasn't. Occasional errors in spelling, as we've mentioned the spelling, they were occasional and they weren't really around the key words and the key terminology, specialist vocabulary, and text was definitely legible. So I would say around 13, 14, if I've been generous, 14 on the day.
Yeah, we've given you 14.
Yep.
You may have got 14 on 13 on another day.
Yeah. Okay.